Not yet. Not yet.
Okay.
How about I say that you're the silver fox, Adrian?
Okay, I'm happy to be the silver fox.
Okay.
I don't know. Russ is pretty silver too.
Gee, this
I
is
guess
going to
I'm
be
not
off the cuff, mate. This is off the... Can everybody see us yet?
Yep.
Okay. Well, we'll give everybody a couple of minutes and then we'll hit the record button. Diane, do you have a record button or has it gone back onto my screen? You've got it. Perfect.
I hit it already, actually.
Yep. Okay, 23. Hello, Jay.
I could have brushed my hair.
Move the camera. You'll be right.
Darken the room.
Oh, these are pretty nice numbers so far. Hopefully we'll get a few more coming in. We'll get up to 30 would be good. I don't know if any of you are up in the high country, but judging by what I'm wearing, you might have an idea of the temperature outside. Russ, are you in Canberra at the moment?
Yes, I am. Yeah, it's freezing. It was raining for most of the afternoon at my place.
Yeah, we went for a paddle in it. It was sleeting.
Oh. Very good.
Okay. Well, this is good. Numbers are still a steady number of people coming in. I'm going to give everybody one more minute. Then that's 7:33 by my GPS controlled clock. And then we'll start. Okay, it's 7:33. Diane, would you like to hit the record button, please?
Yeah, I'm done.
Okay, everybody, this session is now recorded. Welcome to the 4th Paddle New South Wales education webinar. We are changing gears a little bit and wandering down a slightly different avenue of information. And with that, I'm going to pass you on to Lynn because she will do the introductions. Lynn, all yours.
Thank you, Margie. It's a pleasure to introduce our two, I'd like to call you teachers for tonight, but anyway, Adrian and Russ will be doing 4 sessions over the next couple of months, and it sounds exciting. And if you've ever been to Tasmania on the whim, well, now you'll have to repeat because you'll know exactly how you need to go. So Adrian has been delivering sea instructor courses for an age, has worked for a long time in the New South Wales Sea Kayakers, and I noticed that you've got a life membership there now too, Adrian. Adrian, when he calls me, he tells me it's a silver fox calling because he's just a smidge older than I am, aren't you? Anyway, Adrian, I do think that you've been around for some time, paddling and teaching. And can I ask you now to introduce Russ, because I think you know Russ Swinnerton a lot better than I do.
Well, Russ is the glue here, frankly. I'm the contributor of where and how not to do it, which has been achieved over many years. Russ and I have worked on a program like this for about the last 10 years. Russ is highly credentialed as a navigator because he worked as a captain in the Royal Australian Navy, retired some years ago, and has found another life that keeps him occupied. But King Kayaker, what there is to know about navigation, I mean, Russ knows it all. That's, as I say, he's the glue. He's the man who'll be doing all the presenting. I'll just chip in with some anecdotal stuff from time to time, and maybe just help Russ with fielding questions and so forth. So that's Russ and myself done. Back to you guys.
Thanks, Adrian. Thanks, Russ. Margie?
Okay, well, Russ, you ready to start your slideshow?
Yeah, I just need to get presenter so that I can share, and then we can kick off.
Can you do that, Diane?
Yeah, got it now. Thank you.
Cool.
So we've got tonight. We're looking at the tools we'll be using throughout our webinar series and our practical navigation day. Just to kick us off, we are scheduling a practical day on the 19th of November, a venue yet to be decided, where we'll be aiming to put into practice all of the things, techniques, tips we cover during the webinar series. So tonight, as I said, it's tools of the trade, where we'll spend most of the time on compasses, because certainly a float, that's one of your key tools. The rest of the program, September, 13th of September, we're going to do charts and maps. So back to basics on how they're constructed, how we identify datums, dangers, that kind of thing. The whole 9 yards on topos and marine charts. The October session will be natural phenomena. So winds, tides, currents, swells, all the kinds of things we need to take into account when we're planning a trip. Not necessarily a multi-day expedition, any kind of paddling exercise, we've got to think about the natural environment we're in. The final session on the 8th of November, we're looking to bring it all together and focus on piloting, so navigating from the cockpit, how we actually do that. And that's it. So tonight, as we said, we're going to start with plotting instruments. Then we're going to do a little on magnetism and compasses. I'm going to introduce you to a thing called a kamal, which is a stick, a piece of string. And we'll talk a little about electronic tools, GPS, communication devices, electronic mapping. I might pause there and see if Adrian's got anything more to add by way of introduction before we get stuck in.
No, I think you've got it covered there, Russ. Great.
Okay, well, as Margie and Diane said earlier, we'll be recording this so you can come back to it. We've also created a Google Docs folder where you'll be able to download the slide set. We've got an exercise, a plotting exercise for you to try once the session is over as well. So when I pause for breath, I'll pop the link up in the chat line. So you'll be able to grab that, and that should give you full privileges into the Google folder with the slides and the exercise. Oh, and as Margie's just reminded me in the chat line, any questions, if you can please put them into the chat, and we'll save and aggregate those and deal with them at the end.
There may be occasions, Russ, when you will invite questions,
Sure.
Direct feedback.
So one of the first things we're going to suggest by way of a recommendation is that you buy a good book that'll give you a set of reference instructions for navigation. We like Ferrero on the left of that slide. It's a British tradition of navigation, which is very similar to what I learned. But Birch, from a US environment, also very good. There are some good coastal navigation yachting texts around as well that will give you a lot of really useful stuff as well. You can go online as well. There's plenty of material there too. Just be careful online. Usual rules apply. There's a lot of stuff out there, but there's some good stuff too.
Excuse me, Russ. Just on those books, there's with the Ferraro Sea kayak navigation. His interpretation of scale differs to ours. It's the reverse. So his small scale is what we regard as large scale. And with the Birch book, of course, the buoyage system is for the US environment. So it's, again, the opposite to ours with the lateral markers. Yeah.
And the whole tradition of terminology in the US is different to ours in Australia and in the UK, where I did most of my navigation training. So we like Ferrero. In fact, a lot of the slides that we'll have available in this slide set are drawn from Ferrero. Oh. Are we getting a
I'm trying to mute people, sorry.
Thank you. So first, just to clear up a couple of definitions. Now, this is where Ferrero and Birch are different. These are the two traditions we were talking about. But this is our set of the fundamental terms we'll be using when we're talking about direction. So when we're talking compasses particularly, this is what we mean when we say a course. That's a direction we plan to paddle. It may well be allowing for tidal stream. We'll have calculated a course to steer, but the track we make good over the ground, we call track. Okay, so course is what we plan to steer. Course is what we plan to steer through the water, but of course the water moves. So what we make good over the ground is our track. Our heading is where our kayak is pointing at any time. So we're trying to steer a course, but we're not perfect helmsmen. We're going to wander a little around our course, and wherever we're pointing at any particular time, that's our heading. Okay, so heading, course, and track connect that way, and that's the recommended terminology we're going to go for. Now, in Birch, it's a different scheme. So Birch describes course as where you want to go, and then he talks about course made good and course over the ground to allow for the fact that you don't necessarily end up in the way you're paddling. We find that a little confusing, so we're going to recommend that we stick with the terminology of course, what we plan to steer through the water, track, what we're going to make good, and heading, where we're pointing at any particular time. Now, whenever we're going to start to do a planning activity, we've got to dig out the charts, get the protractors and the dividers and the plotting materials with us, and you're never going to be able to do this kind of preparation on the water. So the message we're going to offer throughout these webinars and in the practical day, do as much planning as you can on the kitchen table before you get anywhere near the water. The whole thing about piloting is that you want your hands on the paddle as much as possible, and pre-planning is the way to achieve that. So on the kitchen table, we can use dividers, compasses. Now I've got there some nautical dividers, bow dividers, which you can use one-handed, very handy at sea in a big ship, but you don't need those. So a geometry set will be fine, and geometry set protractors will work fine too. On the kitchen table, there is no big dramas, but you're not going to use these at sea. Protractors and plotters, we're going to suggest you stay away from parallel rules like top left on this slide. So rules that actually slide or go in steps. Use some of the other plotters that you can see on that slide. Whitworths carry these, reasonably priced. I really like the one bottom right. Adrian's favourite is top right. And our two protractors with strings attached to them in the centre of that slide work fine on the kitchen table and afloat. So they're great things to have. The little one on the right is called a Portland protractor. It's also called the Douglas protractor. It depends what the brand name is. Again, Whitworths carry those for you. Now, you don't have to pay attention to the conventions of chart work when you're preparing a trip. You can use whatever symbols work for you, but these are the ones that are sort of generally recognized when you're preparing and when you're actually executing a plan. So a planned course, we can get a dead reckon position, which is based on the course you're steering, the amount of time you're paddling, and we show that dead reckoned position as across our line, and an estimated position, a triangle with a dot on it. And the number of arrowheads will indicate what we actually plan to steer and make good our track, double arrows on the track. As I say, you don't need to worry about this stuff, but I thought we'd just clear the air. So Ferrero's book has these symbols, and once you get used to them, they do make the process a little easier for you. So your kitchen table planning, we're not going to talk about the kind of planning you'll be doing, that comes later, but the essence of preparing a passage plan is that you do it where it's dry and comfortable and warm in the kitchen, and then you take your plan to sea to execute it. So we're using paper maps in map cases. We're using laminated map and chart extracts. We're using Chinograph pencils that work underwater. And again, Whitworths will sell you all this stuff. There are our protractors with strings that we can use to measure bearings. And it's really easy to make yourself a waterproof notebook by laminating a couple of cut A4 sheets, hole punch, some cable ties, and you can make yourself a notebook that you can keep under your bungees, where you can record your plan, any observations you want to keep and plot later. All that can go on that kind of a notebook. Here's a tip from Adrian, that if you put some Velcro onto your spray deck, particularly if you're going to be paddling at night, you can keep everything much better organized in front of you than you can wrestling for things under the bungees, particularly in the dark. Do you want to talk any more about that, Adrian?
No, I think that's well, what you can see on the skirt there is one of the maps for the Hawkesbury Classic. So yeah, I rely on that, and I do a few other things with it as well. You can't see there, but we'll talk about it later in reference to hand railing.
Yeah. And that's Ferrero's short list of stuff to take with you. The bushwalking compass, as we're about to find out, can do a whole lot of things on the water, not just give you direction. You can use that as your protractor, but you need a waterproof pencil, a Chinograph pencil. You need something to record your data and something to measure with. And the bushwalking compass does a whole lot of that. Okay, so they're our plotting instruments. We need something that we can measure bearings, something to measure distances, something to measure direction, and those Portland protractors and the big plastic plotters work fine on the kitchen table for that. Now, we use a compass for direction. So without doing webinar 2 on maps and charts, we know that there's a thing called true north, and that's not necessarily where our compass points. But our compass will give us magnetic north. So we're simplifying that concept on this slide by showing that there's a different magnetic north pole to the geographic north pole. And our compass will follow horizontal lines of magnetic force and vertical lines. And we'll talk about that a little more in a moment. But we describe the difference between what our compass is telling us and what true north is using 2 quantities called variation and deviation. So the difference between true north and magnetic north in our location is called variation, and that varies year to year and from place to place. So on the east coast of Australia, you know it's around about 12 degrees east around the latitude of Sydney. It varies up and down the coast, but we're kind of lucky here that we don't have to worry about west variation in our stretch of water off the east coast. The difference between your ship's compass heading and the magnetic heading is caused by deviation. Now, that's not an obscure term that means nefarious things. It's the result of the magnetic field of your ship, whether your ship's a kayak or a yacht. It may have a magnetic field that you can measure, and you must apply that error as well to your compass heading to be able to generate a true heading. So compass plus or minus deviation gives us a magnetic heading, plus or minus variation gives us a true heading. Can dead men vote twice is a handy way you can remember the order in which those errors get applied. Compass, deviation, magnetic, variation, true. Now, fiberglass kayaks, deviation, not a big problem, you think? We'll show you a little more on that in a moment. But let's just work now on the fact that if we're in a non-ferrous boat, like a kayak, we can pretty much rule out deviation. And we're then moving straight from compass and magnetic being the same, applying variation to give us a true reading. So there are a number of ways in which you can remember which way you need to apply your variation error. Whatever method you decide to use to get variation right every time, it's got to work when you're cold, wet, and tired, and you're getting splashed with water. So what I find works best for me is thinking cadet. Compass, add east, true. So compass to true, we add east. True to compass, we subtract east. So there's 4 sets here. If it's west, variation. Compass to true, subtract west. True to compass, add west. So there's 4 cases. Cadet gives us one of those cases, and we can figure out the rest by elimination. Because our variation on the east coast is true, is east, compass to true, add east works fine. Variation east, compass least, variation west, compass best. That's another popular way of remembering. And as I say, it doesn't matter what way you choose, just be sure you're getting it right. So my favorite, compass to true, add east. Now, just watch this. There's a compass, there's a can of beans, VHF radio that's in your PFD pocket when you're trying to take a bearing? Or your phone and its watertight bag in your PFD? So if you want to rule out deviation, you've got to make sure you're packing your boat properly. So if you're using a hand bearing compass, make sure you've got nothing ferrous close to your chest where you want to be holding your compass, and don't stow your ferrous tins under your compass. How do you check?
Russ, I might just come up with a little anecdote there. A husband and wife team in singles paddling across Bank Strait, first day of a crossing or crossing over Flinders Island. They both had compasses and both had worked out what their headings and courses had to be. Off they go, and they're heading off, and bit by bit they find they're going almost in different directions as well. They're parting, and the husband, the more experienced of the team, says, "Oh, there's something wrong with your compass. You've done something wrong," and so just follow me. And so she does dutifully. And as they go along and getting closer to where they want to go, they find they're still a fair way off. Anyway, they get to where they want to go. Well, what happened there? There it was. She had it right. He had the can of baked beans underneath his compass in the kayak. So just a little illustration where perhaps women should be running the country.
So how do you know? As you take your dry bags up to the your forward hatch to drop stuff in, hold it by the compass and see if there's any movement on the card. That's the way you can tell if you've got something in there, your camp kitchen or whatever it might be, that's going to cause you problems once you get on the water. So what you don't want is anything that's going to create a magnetic field around your steering compass. So here's a little quiz for you. If you'd like to try this, we've got 4 examples there for you where we've got either a true going to magnetic or a magnetic going to true, and we're telling you what the variation is. So the first of these questions, 278 degrees true. What's the magnetic when the variation is 10 degrees west? So we'll give you a couple of minutes to work through those, and then we'll show you the answers to see how you're doing.
While that's happening, Russ, there's a question here. Will metal footrests and pedals, T-bars, also affect compass readings?
Well, if they're not alloy, there's a chance they could. So again, if you've got something with stainless steel nuts and bolts, it's good to get it close to the compass and see if there is any effect. I must say Mirage has come standard with stainless bolts, and I haven't noticed any effect on the compass. But it's a good point, Margie. You're well worth checking it if you're going to mount a compass. We had a pair of images in one of our Sea Kayak Club magazine articles where I was standing in the same spot at Curl Beach, taking bearings of North Head and getting widely different readings. And Adrian was telling me I must be holding the compass wrong, running up and down the beach or something, until we remembered that I had a camera in hand to take the images. So cameras with speakers in them, that's why the VHF radio causes such movement, because there are magnets in the speaker. But a camera is full of electronic bits and pieces that can induce a field and can cause your hand bearing compass to swing by more than 10 or 12, 15 degrees. How are we doing? Shall we wait a little longer?
I think that's probably enough time, Russ.
Okay, so here's the answers. So see how you did. There's no, we're not going to ask you how you did. If it's easy for you, if you've got it right while you're sitting comfortably at home, then good. Just make sure whatever method you're using to tell you which way to apply your variation, make sure that's going to work at the end of a long day on the water. And it reminds me of something Adrian and I were talking about earlier. Do as much of this before you get on the water. If you're laying off courses to steer, put the magnetic course onto your chart extract when you take that onto the water, so you don't have to do a true to magnetic conversion for each course you're planning to paddle. Now, we mentioned that our compass needle follows the horizontal magnetic fields on the surface of the Earth, but the magnetic field has a vertical component as well as a horizontal component. So we think of lines of magnetic force coming out of the southern hemisphere and going in the northern hemisphere. So we want our compass card, to sit flat. So compass manufacturers weight the card to compensate for dip. That's what the vertical component is called. And so if you buy a compass in Canada, it's going to be weighted for those downward going fields of magnetic force. So the back of the card away from the needle is going to have a weight there, so the needle and the card are flat. Take that to the southern hemisphere, to our latitude, and dip is going to just make the effect of that weight worse. So your Canadian compass is going to fall on its side. You can usually operate in the next zone or two and still have a serviceable compass, but you really can't move beyond that. So be very careful if you're buying a cheap steering compass off eBay that's been manufactured in China for that magnetic latitude. It's going to give you problems in Australia. Most of the reputable chandlers in Australia will tell you what their compass is weighted for, what zone. So ask before you buy. And there's another slide there just showing the angle of dip. So it's about 0 around the equator. And as I say, rising in the southern hemisphere, descending in the northern hemisphere. So we're going to talk about compasses a little more now. The three kinds that we're going to focus on: the steering compass, the hand-bearing compass, that's the blue hockey puck, and the bushwalking compass. Okay, they're the three kinds we commonly use on the water. So we'll use this slide again, showing you what a bushwalking compass, what features it has. But the things to note: the index line there at between the rotating housing and the bottom of your red line, that's where you set your course or bearing, where you read off your bearing on that index line. And the rotating housing there has meridian lines that run north-south. Okay, so we'll be using those features in some of the ways we use the bushwalking compass later. So there's a fitted steering compass, the Ritchie compass, 5-degree increments on that, which is about what you get on a steering compass. Hand-bearing compass, the hockey puck, top left, 1-degree increments. It's also got a lubber's line. You'll notice there, that little red line, center bottom. So you can actually use a hand-bearing compass as a steering compass. That lubber's line will tell you what direction the compass is pointing in. Okay, so let's talk a little more about those three different kinds of compasses and what they're good for. So what do we do with a compass? We can find north, obviously. We can orient ourselves. We can orient or orientate, as our army colleagues call it, our map, and try and connect ourselves with what we can see around us. We can follow a heading. We can paddle a course. We can read bearings of visible objects we can see. And we can use a compass on our map or chart to read off bearings and distances. So different compasses do these tasks better than others. So the steering compass, that's the champion for steering a course. It lets us also find north and orient ourselves, orientate our map. We can actually determine the bearing of an object by pointing our kayak at the object and reading the heading. But we wouldn't plan to unship this and use it on our map or chart. But excellent for steering. Now, we'll get to this in session 4 and in the practical day, but you don't steer a compass course by fixating on the compass. You check your heading and then you look up ahead and find something to steer by. It might be a cloud, it might be, if you can see the land ahead, a tree, you're aiming for that tree, and then you periodically check the accuracy of the course you're holding, and are you still pointing at the object up ahead? It's really hard to steer by compass and just by following the compass. So check your heading, look ahead, and follow whatever it is ahead of you. So the hand-bearing compass, we can observe the bearing of an object. That's what it's built for. But we can also use it to find north for orientation. It has a lubber's line, so we can steer a course with it. But it's not a practical tool for measuring bearings and distances on a map. And the bushwalking compass does a whole lot of things really well. We can take stuff off the map. We can read a distance. It's got scales. It's a good one will have eastings and northings too, for particular map scales, to let you read into a square of eastings and northings and decide where you are in there. You can find north. You can really easily orient your map. You can observe the bearing of an object. So you can take bearings with a bushwalking compass, and you can steer a course. So you can use it as a plotter, and it will do all these other things that we use compasses for. So to read a bearing, it's a kind of incremental approach. So what we want when we're taking our bearing of our object, you can see we've got an imaginary red line to our mountain peak. That index line that I talked about earlier at the just this side of the magnifying patch in our bushwalking compass, that's where we read the bearing. You can just see there's a white line there that tells us what the bearing is. Now, it depends on us keeping the north needle aligned with north on our rotating bezel. Okay, so you get a rough bearing of the object, look down at your bushwalking compass and see if they're aligned, tweak it. It'll take a couple of goes, and then look over the compass at your object, keeping that north needle aligned with the letter N. So it takes you a couple of goes, and it's not a terribly accurate bearing. If the object you're taking the bearing of is close, it's fine. If you're within 2 or 3 degrees, that's enough accuracy for our purposes here. But here's the blue hockey puck in use. So you can see how much easier to use this is. You hold it up to your cheek, and you wait till the card settles, and that could take a few seconds if you're on a rolling kayak, and you can read to half-degree increments with your hand-bearing compass. The prism in these compasses focuses at infinity. So you look at the object and the numbers are in focus for you. If you put your torch on the card, you can take it out onto the deck at night, and it will be a luminous card that lets you read the numbers. It is my favorite thing in the world, a hand-bearing compass. I feel very comfortable with one of these hanging around my neck. They work really well yachting as well as in kayaks, as long as you don't have too much of a magnetic field around the cockpit. But very accurate, very convenient. Whitworth sell them around $100 and something each, but a great investment. And bushwalking compasses now are made with a prism in the rotating bezel. So this is a photo of a silver 4-slant 54. These compasses were developed for the army, so artillery spotters could use them to spot the fall of shot. So they needed to be able to take a bearing accurately. And you see I've got a photo, 2 photos there on the left of this slide, initially focused on the viewing port, and then with the camera focused at infinity and actually reading off the bearing. They're very good. They're more expensive than the Plastimo hockey pucks, but they do everything for you. You can steer a course, you can take an accurate bearing, you can use them as a plotter. They're a really great compass. So steering a course, obviously with a steering compass, this is pretty easy. So the compass on the right, built in, appropriate for our magnetic latitude, and we can, depending on our angle, how tall we sit in the kayak, we can use the near numbers, or we can look over the card at the far numbers. So those numbers are repeated on the other side of the card. And that's a more natural reading, if that makes sense. When you're reading the near numbers, they're kind of reversed, and this can make it difficult initially when you're trying to steer a course. It makes you feel like you've got to go in the wrong direction to make the card move the way you want it to move. Now, with our bushwalking compass, we can use that to steer a course. We align the body of the compass with our fore and aft line on the boat. We then set our course on that index mark, the course we want to track. And then we steer the kayak until our needle is pointing to north. And if the needle is pointing to north, then our boat is pointing in the direction that we've set on the moving bezel, that number we've set on the index line. So you can see both of those compasses are heading west in the image. So if you can make it out on the bushwalking compass, that's 270 on the index mark and 270 on the steering compass. It's easier with the steering compass, for sure, but the bushwalking compass will do it. Now, we talked a couple of times about using this thing as a plotter, and Adrian's done a couple of slides here for us to show us how that works. Now, we've put, let me just jump forward a slide. We've got an exercise for you there, which is in the Google Docs folder. I'm about to put the link in the chat. So you can draw lines. So Adrian's done A to B for us. You can draw lines from A to C, A to D, A to E. And if you've got a bushwalking compass at home, you can have a go at measuring those true directions and then turning them into magnetic. So this is an exercise for after we finish tonight. But what we do is we lay off the line we want to cover. So this is our track from A to B. We line up image 2, we line up the edge of our bushwalking compass with that direction. Now we forget the needle. Don't even think about the needle. Now turn the bezel until north is at the top and your meridian lines are parallel to the meridians on our paper chart here. And you can then read off the direction on the index mark. Okay, that's, we're adjusting the bezel to be pointing north, and we're adjusting the body to point in the direction of the track we've got planned. Okay, so while you're thinking about that, let me just pop the link into the chat. And you'll also get the slide set there as well. So if you're keen to try this out, then that link will take you to 2 documents that you can download. 2 Microsoft Word documents in there. One is the exercise sheet, which is this one. And the second one, not to be looked at till you've had a go, is this one, which has got the answers. Okay, so those 2 Word docs are in that Google folder that will give you access to, that link. We've actually got a logical breakpoint now where I'm about to stop talking compasses and start talking kamals. Adrian, is this a good time for you to come in with anything?
I think no, I think you're covering everything so well, Russ. I don't need to come in.
Well, don't hesitate. Give me a break.
I will. You're going well.
So the kamal, nothing to do with that former Malaysian singer who wore kaftans. The kamal that we're talking about is a Middle Eastern tool that's been around for 1400 years. So early navigators would use a card with a string of a fixed length, and if they held that card to the full length of the string, it would give them, the card was prepared to put onto the pole star, and different size cards indicated different latitudes. So the pole star, called the pole star because it's pretty much at the pole, if that's just on your horizon, it means you're on the equator pretty much. As you move north, the pole star appears to rise above the horizon and to appear fixed. Not much use for us in the southern hemisphere, but worked fine for in the Middle East, Red Sea, Indian Ocean, where you had some small northern latitudes. So you didn't have to have too big a card to get a measure on Polaris. So we've adapted that technique a little now. So my stick is now a chunk of centimetre ruler, and I've got a string, so a little bridle connected to it, and I've got a string that's 57.3 centimetres long. And I'll explain why that's handy to know in a moment. But we can use this as our cut price sextant to measure vertical angles or horizontal angles. Okay, so we can measure the height in degrees of an object, and we can measure the width in degrees of an object. So it depends on a concept called the radian. So you may well remember this from high school arithmetic. So a radian is a segment of a circle where the arc on the circumference is as long as the radius of the circle. Hence, it's called a radian. So 2 sides to that chunk of pie, and then the piece of circumference the same length as the radius. And a radian is about 57.3 degrees, if we're using the convention of 360 degrees to the circle. So that means if our radius is 57.3 centimeters, then the arc of the circumference will also be 57.3 centimeters. So if we hold our piece of ruler at that distance, each centimeter becomes a degree. So that's the principle that this is based on. Okay, so this is a little unhygienic. You don't pass this around your paddling group because you stick the knot that you've tied in the string at 57.3 centimeters. You stick that between your teeth so that you are then holding the kamal at 57.3 centimeters from your observation point. And we hold the thing at arm's length and we measure the height or width of an object. And if we know what that height is, and we can read that off our chart, we're then able to use simple trigonometry to calculate our distance off. So this is a quick way to get a range. Okay, and I mean range in our convention, a distance, not a range transit in the US convention. I mean a distance off. And it's just simple geometry. I'm just using a tan relationship here. So we measure from the top of the object to its waterline. And remember that your height of eye in a kayak, your waterline's only about, your horizon rather, is only about 2 kilometers away. So when you're looking at distances beyond that, you've got to get a bit creative to judge where the waterline would be. So this is not precision by any means, but it's going to give you a range probably accurate to about a quarter of a mile, a quarter of a nautical mile. So about 600 meters, which is pretty good, frankly, for a bit of stick on a string. So mental arithmetic, I can use that radian rule relationship in my head most times and figure out what my distance off is, knowing the height of the object and what fraction of 60 degrees those degrees that I'm reading off are. But even easier is to have a little table pre-planned. Now, I know that's very fine print, but trust me, we've got a navigation data sheet that we'll make available for you, which has heights of some of our objects around here, around Sydney, Macquarie Light, Barrenjoey Light, and in Port Stephens, the height of Yakabar Peak, Gangan Radio Towers, already marked on there. So with an information sheet like this under the bungees, we can observe the height in degrees. We then come into our table with the number of degrees, go to the height of our object, and we can read off a distance in nautical miles. And we've used this practically on a bunch of Sea Kayak Club courses, and the results have been actually pretty good. So if you're paddling towards an island, your direction's fine because you're heading for the island. You know how wide the island is from this angle. Looking at how wide it is in degrees, knowing the width, you can calculate a distance off and get an idea of how you're doing for making your pull out on time. So that's the kamal. Very simple, easy to make. So I've got a couple of them in my nav bag that I bring around to when we're doing practical sea days. The other thing you can do, put the knot in your teeth, hold the thing at arm's length and see how many fingers equate to degrees. Now, a finger without a glove is about 1.5 degrees. With a glove, it's about 2 degrees. But figure out what that is, because then you don't need the kamal. You can just put your arm out and count the fingers to measure the height of the object. And again, using the radian rule or the table, you can then get a quick distance off. So from now till the end of the session, we're going to be talking about electronic aids. We'll start with GPS. We'll do a little on communications, and then we're going to talk a little about electronic mapping. But there's so much out there that we'll just tell you what we like. and you're probably already using something that's pretty handy. So we've got an older generation 76 series GPS on the left of this slide. We've got a bunch of more modern GPS there. The white one's an 82 series Garmin. The top orange one's a 60 series. That's actually a 66C. The yellow one is, you'll have noticed, it's a personal locator beacon. That's probably the most important GPS you'll carry on board your kayak. It's only a one-way communicator, but it passes your GPS position to the satellite. And when you need that to be known, that's a really reassuring thing to have with you. Bottom right is the smallest color, I think it's a color screen. Yes, it is. The smallest Garmin color screen map capable GPS. It's the eTrex 20, and they're only a couple of $100 these days. And really lots of features in there for a really bargain price. And on the right, the kinds of GPS that we're probably all wearing at the moment. These don't have a map function, but they do have navigation capabilities, as well as giving you very accurate time. So that's mine on the left, a Garmin Instinct, and Adrian's on the right. So
a Forerunner. It's
yeah,
a Garmin Forerunner.
So we might see limitations with GPS reasonably, but it's really better than we think. It's an excellent system, but you've got to be careful with some basics like garbage in, garbage out applies here just as much as anywhere else. If you put the wrong waypoint in, you just get the numbers wrong, easily done with your thumbs when they're wet and cold, then you're going to be paddling to the wrong place. You need to make sure you've got the WGS84 datum selected. If the kids have been playing with the GPS, they may well have set it to something else. So make sure that you're connecting to the right model of the shape of the Earth to make sure you're going to get a reliable position that connects to the charts and maps of the area you're paddling in. The tendency with GPS, because it's so wonderful and will take you to your waypoint, is that you just paddle to the waypoint and do a kind of curve of pursuit. That's going to be a lot further to paddle than pre-planning what you need to steer, what course you need to steer to make good a track to your destination. Okay, so it doesn't obviate the necessity for planning. You still need to do that, but having the ability to pull up waypoints to give you a precise location, it's just great. For those of us who grew up in the sextant era, it's still a miracle having a GPS under your bungees. So here's an example of that in Bass Strait. Do you want to talk to this, Adrian?
Yes, certainly. Two examples of crossing from Wilson's Promontory over to Hogan Island. The image on the right is where all the planning was done, taking into account tidal streams and so forth. And as you can see, it's a relatively straight route. Getting around Hogan, perhaps that little island over on the right-hand side, influenced by tidal flows around the island. The one on the left you can see is much longer. Now, it's not as though they didn't do their planning, but they had a equipment malfunction before leaving Wilson's Prom, and took about 3 or 4 days to correct. So they used their original planning, not taking into account what had changed in those 4 days in relation to tidal streams. And as you can see, it was a rather circuitous route. I think the upshot in terms of the time taken, it was about 4 hours longer to get from Wilson's Prom to Hogan Island.
So
that's a distance of about 50 kilometres.
Yeah. So that's a really good example, I think, of where you've you've still got to do your preparation, still got to do the planning to decide what you're going to steer to be able to track. But GPS, so there are modern GPSs that give you course deviation indicators that can actually tell you if you're moving off your planned track. But again, batteries can go flat, lanyards can break, GPSs can fail. We saw a note from Stuart Truman earlier today about his GPS packing up off the Northwest Shelf somewhere. It's good not to have to rely on things like a course deviation indicator, but to plan your track, check your position periodically with GPS to satisfy yourself that you're making good what you plan to make good. There are some additional plotting symbols for GPS, a box with crosshairs for a waypoint and a circle with a dot in the center with GPS written next as your fixed position. The point of this is you should put your GPS position onto your chart or map extract periodically in case your battery does fail. If you're not able to keep your reckoning up just by looking at the land going past, then update it by using GPS. And you can use your watch, because it will give you a Latin long readout, you can handrail until you reach a predetermined latitude, if that's where your pullout is. So you can use your watch to track along a coast to a predetermined latitude. It will also give you your watch will give you a very reliable distance over the ground, so taking account of tidal stream. And modern GPS watches have navigation functions that let you input waypoints, track to them, track back to the start. They're very fully featured. They're great. So let's just talk about communications a little now. We've mentioned the PLB. That's the personal one. That's the one you wear in your PFD. EPIRBs, electronic position indicating radio beacons, are what belong to the boat. The current rules are that they should be in a free floating bracket, so that if your boat sinks, they'll float free, activate and raise the alert. Not practical in a kayak. So the PLB inside the PFD is what's going to keep us safe. So communicates in one direction, that's to the satellite in an emergency.
Russ, if we could just talk, sorry, Russ, we could just talk about EPIRBs at the moment. AMSA regulations say that EPIRBs are mandatory. I think it's as from the 1st of January last year. Carrying an EPIRB is mandatory. Needs a little bit of clarification. I think if you ask two people from AMSA the same question, I'm a kayaker and am I required to carry an EPIRB when I paddle off the coast, you'd probably get different answers. But my reading of it is that kayakers don't need to have EPIRBs. The PLB is enough. The EPIRB, from what I understand, is mandatory if you're in a commercial vessel and it's more than 12 meters or 12 meters plus. That's my understanding of the AMSA regulation. But as I say, I find it a little bit ambiguous. So perhaps it's something that people might want to check if they're heading. And sorry, it's also 2 nautical miles. If you're going beyond 2 nautical miles, they're saying you've got to have the EPIRB. But as I say, I think it applies to vessels 12 meters and over, and they are commercial vessels. So unlikely a commercial kayak operation is going to be taking people 2 nautical miles offshore.
Yeah, I didn't actually see the 12-meter thing in their regulations. I'm not saying it's not there. I didn't do a huge amount of research. The thing, though, is if you're more than 2 miles offshore, you should have the PLB in your PFD, not in your day hatch. The thing about a PLB is that it must be worn. That's why they call it personal. So you're probably okay inside 2 nautical miles with it in the day hatch, but if you're further out, you've got to have it. That would be your defence if you did happen to get sprung 2.5 miles out without an EPIRB. Marine VHF has rules as well. You need a marine. So there's 2 kinds of marine radio officers, radio operator certificates. The full one, which gives you HF as well as VHF. You need the local version of that, which is easier to get because you don't have to pass an HF radio test. But you technically need a marine operator's radio operator certificate to have a VHF in your pocket. But it's common sense again, I think, like the PLBs and EPIRBs. If you're in an emergency and you've got access to a marine radio, you're not going to get sued for calling up on channel 16 and raising the alarm. So these are really handy things for local areas. So they go a little beyond line of sight, but you're not talking much beyond 25 kilometres range, and even that's optimistic. But they're great around coastal areas, and as I say, as insurance against a problem. So the one there, an ICOM, Whitworth's again, they're not all that expensive. This one floats. If it falls in the water, it flashes so you can see it, and it has multiple channel monitoring, so you can keep guard on channel 16, and you can have another frequency that you're working with your group. And technically, if you're using it under supervision, so if someone in your paddling group has a license, then they can supervise you to use the radio.
Russ,
white.
Sorry, excuse me, Russ. Can we
yes.
just talk a little bit more about channel 16, what its function is, and other channels that are commonly used?
So channel 16 is international calling and distress. So you're quite okay to call up Marine Rescue on channel 16 and they'll put you to a working frequency. But its main calling and distress, you don't hang around on channel 16 because it's there as a distress frequency. So you make your initial call because that people will be listening on channel 16 and then go to a working frequency. So I don't have the list in front of me of allocations of channels, but a bunch of them are used for commercial operation, for defence operation, but there's a bunch you can use for ship to ship. So 70, 71,
72, 74 generally.
Yeah. So you can use those in your kayak group and adopt. So we don't have an international call sign in a kayak. So you might be kayak Russ and kayak Adrian. That works fine. On those channels where you preset the channel you're going to be on, and you can just call and work as appropriate. If there's interference there, if you're getting other people calling in, then you can shift to a different frequency.
Just one other channel that's used is channel 67 for the weather, the issue of the weather forecast. So I think it's on the hour, on the half hour or thereabouts. You'll get a call on channel 16 if you're monitoring it, telling you to go to channel 67 to get the latest weather report.
And they'll normally announce that too on 16 to say there's a forecast about to be delivered. I wonder if we should pick up that question that's just been asked about using a call sign. So the answer is we normally contact them by telephone rather than VHF and just discuss the operation that we're going to do and then check back in with them when we get back to shore to avoid that awkwardness of not having a ship's name or call sign that we can use on channel 16 when we call them up. If no mobile phone coverage and you had to do it, then you do it. The idea is this makes us all safer if we're using techniques like this. So I'd have no hesitation about calling them up. Have you done that, Adrian? Have you called them on VHF before a programmed
Yeah,
activity?
but prefer to do it on the phone. Just one thing though, with the VHF as opposed to the mobile phone, in an emergency situation, the rescue authorities prefer VHF communication as opposed to telephone. The reason being that there's a fair amount of people can get involved. They can hear what's happening. You know, with a telephone, you're just calling one place, whereas on the marine radio, the VHF, if you're in distress, the person who's going to come to your aid may not be the person you're trying to ring. If that's the way of getting that point across. Many people can listen in to a VHF call, whereas only one person listens in on a telephone call.
Yeah.
Is that clear enough?
Yeah, that's good. So the white GPS down the bottom there is an 82S. That's also got an InReach version. So you get the satellite navigator, plus it's got satellite messaging. So let me just jump a slide. So Spot and InReach are two satellite-based messaging systems that give you really great functionality. Spot's the cheaper of the two. InReach has more functions. Both need monthly subscriptions on top of buying the hardware. So if you're moving beyond VHF and mobile phone range, though, these are great and well worth investing. You might only need one per group, but a great thing to do. Glenn has just posted in the chat line too, Marine Rescue has an app where they will track your trip. Free to use, log in easily. We'll have to update the slides. Thanks, Glenn. Adrian, did you get any feedback on Spot and InReach on those recent expeditions?
Yeah, they're being used in different circumstances with kayakers on reasonably big expeditions. For instance, a group of the Sea Kayak Club paddlers went off to Greenland, about 3 or 4 years ago, and took InReach with them, and it worked well. I had the role here back in Australia of giving them reports every day, texting them reports on what they call the egg code, which in the region they were in, it tells them about ice flows and so forth, where they could paddle, where the ice wouldn't let them go and so forth. They had a sat phone with them. I'm going to talk about that in a moment, which they never used. The InReach would interface with an app on their phones, so entering data into it was a lot easier through that app. Yeah, it worked effectively for them. Then I had somebody tell me recently that they used InReach in a crossing of Bass Strait where they had some outages for a few days, and I think they're still trying to work out what actually happened. But lots of functionality, as you say. Got the breadcrumbing thing, you track and so forth. It receives, sends messages, and so forth. It's a low annual fee, apart from the hardware. It's a low annual fee, and it's pretty flexible. You can sort of opt in and opt out. So you pay your annual fee, and then the actual extra money you pay only relates to how much you use it.
Yeah, I think it's $5 a month to park it and to suspend your subscription when you're not actually on the water.
Right. So my information might be a little bit out of date on that, but you've got a fair bit of flexibility with the service.
Yeah.
Now Richard Barnes used Spot. He had a sat phone as well, but he had a Spot device. And again, I think a lot of people would have been following him, looking at the breadcrumbs as he went along his circuitous way. So my understanding with Spot is that it's limited in terms of the amount of messaging it can provide.
Yeah.
As you say, it's a cheaper device.
Yeah. We might need to move on, I think, Adrian. We're fast running out of time here. Satellite phones. So we've got voice and messaging available. You normally buy a phone that's locked to a particular satellite constellation. Inmarsat, Iridium, and Thuraya are the main brands, but you can hire sat phones. So if you're doing just a short trip, you may not want to spend $2,000 on a Inmarsat sat phone. How you keep them charged, because most of them don't have replaceable batteries, so you're going to need a solar panel and a converter that's going to let you keep these things charged when you're off the water. Now, as I said, there's lots of electronic charts available, so we're not going to give you a run through on all the different kinds. You'll already be using some, probably, and whatever works for you, that's fine. So I've got, because I'm mostly Garmin handhelds, I'm using HomePort on a PC and Basecamp on a Mac. I use Active Captain on an iPad and Wärtsilä Ice Sailor on an iPad. I also use Oz Runways for the seaplane, but that's another story. They're all okay. The good thing about them is that they let me move stuff between the handheld and the plot on the PC, so I can do planning, I can transfer waypoints, I can download tracks off the handheld, all that kind of thing. Adrian uses Memory Map on PC, so there's lots around, either apps for your PC or for your iPad or phone. Just check what the costs are before you sign up. Some apps are free, and then you pay a lot for your subscription to charts. You also want to check what they offer in terms of printing. If you want to print the extract of your day's run and laminate it for the bungees, make sure you can do that. The thing to keep in mind, though, is none of these are approved as your primary navigation source. Now, no one's going to beat you up as a kayaker if you're using a non-approved navigation source, but the only electronic chart system is the one that the hydrographer supplies, and that costs as much as paper charts. The recommendation from the hydrographer is you should check, before you go into an unfamiliar area, you should check a paper chart first, then use your electronic chart for the detailed planning and downloads and stuff. But these are not approved for primary navigation. And as we said, the Garmin handheld interfaces pretty well for waypoints and things like that.
Excuse me, Russ, just one comment on the chat here from Steve Hitchcock. I radioed Marine Rescue last year, and they asked me to switch to my mobile. So that's an interesting one. Maybe Steve might like to add to that when we wrap up this. Yeah,
we're nearly there. So in fact, we are there. We've got just a little bit of summing up to do in a moment, but we've got nearly 10 minutes for questions, comments, any. Let me stop the share. And how are we doing? Have I been seeing all the questions on the chat line anyway? I think I have. Have you don't have any more, Dan?
No, I think they're all in the chat group.
Right. So have we got any questions? Either go into voice mode or pop them in the chat.
Just trying to unmute everyone.
Well, while we are waiting for Diane to unmute people, Russ, your comment about spots is I found an interesting one. I use them extensively with students working in very remote areas in Africa, and I'm sitting in Australia. We find the messages very useful. So every day they hit the normal message that says, I'm okay, don't worry. And then there's a series of messages that Spot allows you to send. I think there's up to 5, depending on what license you have, of higher and higher and higher order of concern. And that's actually really quite useful, because sometimes you are in a little of a niggle, but you don't need anyone to panic. And it's a very quick method of letting people know what's happening.
Yeah. No, that's right. But as you say, the more complex your exchanges, the price goes up. There's character limits, all kinds of things that. But yeah, it's fantastic. It's really good, and InReach as well. I think gives you a lot of functionality. The same kinds of limits, a limited number of messages per day, and size of message, things like that. I guess they're managing a relatively small constellation of satellites. And there's bandwidth issues, but it's a great service, I think, particularly if you've got an emergency.
Yep. Everybody, you might be able to unmute yourself. We can't seem to unmute you globally at the moment. If you have a question, just click on your mic and unmute yourself. And if that doesn't work, please use the chat. Any questions? No questions?
They all want to go have an early mark, clearly. Well, I've got just a quick summary slide, if I can bring that up, and I may be interrupted at any time with a question. Don't hesitate. But let me just emphasize just a couple of things that that we'd like you to take away from this session. The first one about the more planning you can do where it's warm and dry and comfortable on your kitchen table, the better. So as much planning as possible ashore, then take your plan to sea to execute it. Magnetism and compasses. Can dead men vote twice? The dead men, we often don't have to worry about deviation, provided we're packing our kayak carefully, taking account for any ferrous material that we're stowing away. So the compass reading is effectively the magnetic reading. We add variation to that to give us true. And I use compass to true at east, cadet, but whatever works for you, just as long as you get it right. We can use steering compasses for steering. We can use hand bearing compasses for bearings. And you can use a bushwalking compass for everything, particularly if you put a prism on it. So that silver 454 is well worth having a look at. Prices have come down since I bought mine, I'm disappointed to say, but that's good news. They're a really good compass. A kamal or your fingers will work well for giving you a distance off. We'll make that navigation data sheet available for you. I've got one laminated that I keep under the bungees. Very handy. There's also space in there for you to draw a tidal chart for the tides of the day, so you can tell at a glance how much water you've got and what the screen is doing. GPS, fantastic. really accurate, but be careful entering your data, make sure you're getting your waypoints in correctly, and pre-plan your courses to steer to make good your track to destination. Mobile phone, marine VHF for local comms, but look at Spot or InReach, or if you're a Baron, a sat phone, when you're starting to plan for remote expeditions. As Margie says, that daily check-in message, all okay, will reassure loved ones at home. And I'll just leave that slide up, which has got the program for the rest of the series. So our next session will be on the 13th of September, where we'll be talking maps and charts. They are different and they do different things. We'll be talking about the strengths and weaknesses of both and their utility. We had an interesting text from Stuart Truman this afternoon saying he was using fishing maps and topos going around Australia, and they worked fine. Adrian, any more from you?
Only just on that last slide, that slide we've got up there now, Russ, there's a link there to a calendar posting on the Paddle New South Wales education calendar for a practical navigation to sea kayakers. It's a day out on the water, and it basically covers or puts into practice all these things that we're covering in the webinars, the 4 webinars. So there's a link there. If you're interested, have a look at it, and we're keen to get some sort of feel for who's interested in attending that session. Venue is yet to be decided. It'll be Metropolitan Sydney, Broken Bay in the north, Port Hacking in the south, somewhere there. Won't be Sydney Harbour, might be Botany Bay, but there'll be various determinants, and that'll be sorted out once we know who's interested in coming. The link is there on that slide.
And you can get to the link in that Google Docs folder. The presentation is there. You'll have to download it. We put in so many images that it's a huge file that you actually can't open in Google Docs. You've got to download it first, but then you've got the full slide set.
Excellent. Well, we have a couple of minutes left. Come on, somebody, ask a question.
Well, Russ, I've got one for you. Just going back to the compass types, with the steering compass, the deck-mounted steering compass, where the graduations finest 5 degrees, sometimes 10 degrees, and the sort of, let's say, error one could make if, say, 5 degrees off at 10 kilometres, paddling at 10 kilometres, which would be what, around about 300 metres, rough calculation.
Yeah.
So that might trouble some people, that that degree of might be perceived as inaccuracy, and if you're paddling for a featureless shoreline other than the point you want to get to, which is, say, a narrow opening to a creek where your camping site is 500 metres up, you miss that side. Okay, we know we've got other techniques of dealing with that, but just on that situation with one might say, the lack of accuracy with the steering compass being, graduated in 5 or 10 degrees.
Yeah, so the trick I have always used is to try and prepare a plan that has courses that are in 5 or 10 degree increments. So I try not to prepare a course that is 1, 2, 3 degrees. I'll do 1 to 5. and just adjust my plan to take account of that. Now, if you're hand railing, and you're all over the place. But if you are laying off a course to an island, going to Broughton Island or something like that, do it in 5 or 10 degree increments, and that way you're steering the course that you, and it's easier on the compass to read that course. 5 degree increments should mean you can read to 2.5 degrees accuracy. That is, you can judge the center of the 2 increments reasonably accurately. So it's not too bad. But that use that trick, keep that in mind, of pre-planning your courses so they're easy to steer. That was from my Navy days, where we would have a sailor often manually steering the ship. So the job was easier with a nice round figure to steer.
Thanks.
Yep. I was wondering, coming from a blue water sailing background, are there shielded compasses, shielded handheld compasses?
No, you really can't shield them. So you try and find a space around the cockpit with little magnetic interference. So if you've got a stainless steel steering wheel, steer clear of that. Look for areas where there's likely to be less magnetic interference. When I charter, I often find the lubbers lines are 15 degrees out. No one seems to pay attention to these things but me. It's really frustrating. But I've used the hand bearing compass, shooting things up, going into an anchorage in Whitsundays and shooting up a small marker from 5 miles out and not being able to see it, and going ashore to find the tree had grown up in front of it. The shoot up was accurate enough to identify the correct bush. So that was on a Beneteau 42. It's got an engine, it's got electronics and things like that, but standing up in the cockpit, it seemed to work fine.
Okay.
You'll find where there are areas where you start to get dodgy readings, and try and avoid those.
Yeah.
Can we
I
just
do a
come
nice
back?
Sorry, mate.
Just come back to the question, or not the question, the point that Steve Hitchcock made about marine radio rescue, I should say, asking him to ring them on his phone rather than talk to them on radio. You can hear us, Steve?
Yes, you can hear me too.
Yeah. Did they give an explanation why they wanted you to do that?
No, and it was a bit of a hassle because my phone obviously was in my day hatch in a waterproof bag, and it took a few minutes to get it out and to take the call. In fact, I missed the first time they called me, had to call them back. But I won't do that again. Next time I'll say, look, let's stay on the radio. It's far easier for me, and say it's far more useful to them.
Yeah, interesting one. I would have thought they would encourage you because they have that marine rescue radio service, don't they? So it's hardly encouraging you to subscribe to it when they say, no, don't use your radio, use your phone.
I know. It did feel a bit weird at the time, but anyway.
I do some volunteer work for Marine Rescue here in Port Macquarie, and the reason that they do that is because then they've got your phone number on record.
Oh, okay.
I wonder if we could use our mobile phone number as a VHF identifier then.
Yeah.
100%. That's exactly what we do. So we'll write down the phone number and we'll then have that as an identifier for that particular vessel.
Yeah.
I work for the Marine Rescue as well, and I asked at my local unit, and they never heard of it. They said, no, we always use radio. I work on the Hawkesbury unit, whereas the example I referred to earlier was in Sydney Harbour.
We should paddle more and try these things out.
Okay, we are over time. If there's any other questions, I'll give you 3 seconds.
can I just put my email address in the chat?
Yeah.
In case anyone does have if they think of something overnight, you can reach me on that. That's my expendable email address. So I'm happy to get any kinds of messages to that one. And if anyone has a question that arises, don't hesitate to wing me an email.
Yep. Okay. Well, we're going to officially stop the recording as of now. And those of you who wish to stay online,